Hello there everybody, this is Krista and welcome back to the Krista Chronicles. And today we are doing the second segment of the recent release test pilot, which is a video series idea I started, I want to say in January. So, if you didn't see that one though, or just don't remember because I wouldn't, what these recent release test pilots are taking decks that have come out recently within the last few months that I have brought in, or either that or sent for review, whatever it may be. And this is kind of coming back around from either talking about it, whether I do a walkthrough or showing it in my new deck digest or whatever it is. Coming back around from those usually tend to be very much first impressions, just getting the deck, seeing what I think, coming back after using it for a little bit, and just telling you how it's been working for me, what I think about whatever deck it is that has recently come out. So, I'm now realizing, I like to say when these things were released, and I forgot to look up the first one. But this is a very recent release, but this is one that I was sent by US Games for review. Actually, we'll start with those two. We'll do those two first, because why not? When did this come out? Ooh, is it not going to give me an exact date? But I like when they do. Anyway, I think I pretty much know. We're going to start with the Erenberg Tarot. Now, this was out later February, I'm pretty certain, from US Games, but I've had this probably for around a month or two now. And so I've been able to use it for quite a few weeks, which is so cool. Like, I don't know, I still feel like I pinch myself about that. It's just so neat, and it gets me so excited. Anyway, Erenberg Tarot. So this is available. You can buy it from the US Games website or Amazon. I'll put links to everything below. And I have been loving this one, really loving this one. I've been using it a ton the last few weeks. This one do I usually hold up all the decks? Anyway. I'm a little all over the place. I feel like I had to, I don't usually rewatch my own videos, but I had to for this one to, remember the format, which was weird. But anyway, look at that death card. So this is one, it is pretty much like an RWS clone, but we're zoomed in on certain details. I do have a walkthrough of this up if you're interested in really seeing all of the cards, but this is one that from the get-go I have just been obsessed with. And how this deck has come to really function for me over the last few weeks is it's one that sits on, so back here is my really kind of what I would say official reading desk. I do my morning reading there every single morning. Sometimes if I'm really doing a otherwise planned out reading, I'll sit there. But where I am filming right now is my desk with my computer, where that's pretty much any other time of the day where I'm in this room, I'm sitting here because this is where I, watch my YouTube or do any sort of work, video editing. I'm always sitting here. This lives on this desk because to me this feels like a really good, spur of the moment, everyday reader of those things throughout the day where maybe you want to do a quick reading on, get a quick idea of, because this deck really strikes the balance well of being familiar but adding something different. You know what I mean? Where the Emperor, we look at this card and it immediately will conjure up the Emperor, the idea of the Emperor. But then you can kind of look at this card and be like, all right, what are we zoomed in on here? We've got the Bull and the Ankh and this like golden orb thing. And so we can kind of look at that and see like, all right, based on this, like what are we highlighting that's important here? Really interesting. So this has really been the deck that's been living on my desk for those quick readings where, you know, I want the message, I want to know that I'm gonna get it right away, but I still, again, I like having some intrigue and I like when the cards do something different, and this feels like it really toes that line so perfectly. So that's really how this one's been functioning for me, and this is the first deck in a very, very long time that usually with these I will, you know, talk about the deck and then I'll show what I've been pairing it with, because deck pairings is a big thing for me. I am always pairing Oracle and Tarot. It's very extremely rare that I don't do that, but this is one of those cases. This is one that I don't really know that, oh my gosh, excuse me, my voice. Are we back? We're back. The star, moon, and sun I'm obsessed with. But this is one that I don't pair. I don't pair with anything. It's just, I don't know, it feels like just a deck where it's like, when you want tarot, you know what I mean? Not to say that you can't pair this with things. I'm sure there's a lot that it would go really nicely with, but personally, I don't know. The only way I have to explain is it feels like one I can just like grab and shuffle and pull cards and get the message. And I really love it for that. Oh, it seriously has been living on my desk since I got it. I love it so much. I would be curious if you do have this already and you pair it with anything. I'd love to know, but it's just one of those decks that I find is like, when I just want a quick like 3-card tarot reading, that's it. That's what I go to this deck for. So really, really loving that. So let's get on to the next. All right, so we will go right into the other deck I have here that I was sent for review by US Games, and that is the Wisdom of the Wild Things Oracle. This is another one I do have a walkthrough up of if you want to see, again, those cards close up, I suppose. But this one also came out, I did it again, or I didn't look it up. I want to say this was another one that was out in February. Maybe it's Amazon that I'm able to see like the date. Oh yeah, that is. Oh, excuse me. Came out January 19th. So it's been out for a good bit. I got this probably, again, that same kind of package beginning of January, I want to say. Maybe December. Maybe December. Don't remember. But I've really been enjoying this one. What this feels like to me, how this has kind of been functioning for me in readings, and what I find I've been going towards this for is, it is no secret that I really love decks that are forest themed, anything like green and earthy, and especially when there's magic involved, like fairies, totally my thing. So I knew this was going to be one I really liked. And so just always, I tend to be using a lot of decks that revolve around those themes. So I find what I really have been liking this deck for is when I'm doing a reading that's using decks that are very kind of green and earthy and foresty, which is most of the time, doing that reading and then pulling one of these cards almost as like a bit of a wrap-up message, but a guide towards actionable steps for whatever the reading revealed. I hope that makes some sense. Something about these cards, I think the key phrase, like cultivate story, feels very like an actionable step. Guard the nesting ground. And I think because we get a very specific, just magical, fantastical creature on each of these cards, and it has this really kind of like inviting energy. All of them have this very inviting energy. It feels just really nice to pull a card from this deck at the end of a reading to say, okay, almost like what little forest woodland companion is gonna walk with me through this? You know, whatever the reading revealed, that, you know, maybe it's something I need to work on or examine a little bit more closely, or even if it's just like a like reading in the morning of like, okay, what's my day gonna look like? This is really functions so well for me as, okay, who's walking with me? And I love that. It just feels like, again, this little companion that is so inviting and just makes whatever it is feel easier, and again, gives that actionable step. Like, I mean, that one literally says take action. Listen to the music of your soul. It just really feels so perfect for that job. Look at that. Protect your boundaries. It gives something to do, which is what I really enjoy. So that's kind of how that deck has been working out for me. I've been really enjoying it. So that being said, let's take a look at some of the things I've been pairing it with. Okay, so I have 2 decks that so far I've just been really particularly loving pairing with the Wisdom of the Wild Things. The first being, surprise, surprise, Forest of Enchantment. I mean, both have the perfect woodland magical theme. It felt like obvious that I was going to pair these two. And pleased to report that they, at least in my opinion, pair really nicely together visually. They read really well together for certain. I've just been really enjoying these two together. Yeah, look at them. Ugh. I haven't really sat down to do, excuse me, like a flip through like this with this deck necessarily. I do think I showed some pairings in my walkthrough, but I did that quite a few weeks ago now, so I don't really remember. So I'm just going off of the two that I've just really been repeatedly pulling out with this deck. But also I will say that I will often, since this is one I tend to use as kind of like a wrap-up message, I will pull it out really with just sort of any kind of reading I'm doing, even if aesthetically it doesn't really match. So this is one that I do use it a lot beyond just specifically pairing it in this way. Again, really just as a factor of how I've been using it a lot as a wrap-up message, but I do also really enjoy it as just like a daily draw. And so when I have used it in that way, this is the decks I've been really enjoying. I think it just pairs so nicely, right? So that is the Forest of Enchantment. And then the second pairing I'm really excited about because it's a deck that I feel like I haven't used it a ton since I got it, and I do think in part because I was just like, what do I put with it? And that is the Raven's Dream Tarot by MJ Cullinane. But these look so beautiful together, and I feel like it just has made me want to pull out this tarot a lot more than I was, which is really exciting because I do really like this tarot deck. I think I just was having some trouble pairing it. But it's another one that is very like, this is like Dream World Forest, but of course takes on that kind of magical lean. And I just think they look so nice together. Something about the artwork, they just really go. Both of them are a little tiny bit of like, oh, what's going on here? You know what I mean? But in different ways that really just lend themselves well to each other. Look at this bunny. Oh my gosh. We're gonna focus. Look at him. Oh, he's so cute. I love the characters in this oracle. And it being this real, like, magical forest with these characters we get in the oracle, it just feels really cool to use this tarot that is like we're following this raven's dream. And so since these creatures are very much just kind of like created for this oracle, it really feels like it fits into that dream world. So it's like we're not kind of breaking the story of this deck with this oracle, which is why I think I like them together so much. Because it just feels like these seamlessly fit into the dream world created with the tarot. So really, really enjoying these two together. I think they're such an awesome pairing. They read well together. I just love them. I love them together. So that's what I got for this one. Let's move on to the next deck. All right, so actually the rest of my decks I have here happen to be indie decks. And of course, I'm not looking up when they came out. What the heck? Although I don't really know with the indie decks, that might have to be a bit more of a guesstimate on my part, but I think all of these came out somewhat recently. Actually, all of them are like Kickstarters or pre-orders, so it really is also just like when we got the deck, which can vary. So we're just gonna do a guesstimate. What do I want to start with? Let's start with, oh, okay, we can kind of go in order of me receiving them from, yeah, let's do that. So this deck came in, and I want to say maybe it was November or December. It's the Sylvankind Oracle by Greg White. Now, I will say this is one that I do feel like it was maybe November or somewhere in that region. It came in and I really didn't touch it for quite a bit after getting it. So this is an oracle of trees. These animated personified trees, which is so, I love it so much. But as you can see, at least to me, the coloring and theming of it just wasn't jiving with wintertime for me, so that's really just why I did not touch it. But as part of Dawn Michelle's Weavers membership, our theme for the fellowship last month, it was not that there was a theme, but it involved theming around trees. So I used this deck for that Weaver's practice. So that's sort of where my use of it came in. And so I've been using it, I used it all last month. And I really, really loved it for that. It really feels like it has this just a really nice guiding energy. And I think it really does do a good job at feeling like it's connected to that kind of tree energy, which to me, I feel like is an energy that feels like a guide, feels kind of like old and full of wisdom. And I think this deck connects to that kind of energy super well. And so that's really how it functioned for me. Of course, in that practice, it is guided, so, you know, that has some influence. However, I do feel like that's just, it worked so well because that's the energy the deck has. So I really picture myself, especially when we get into that like late spring, certainly the summer season when the trees really come to life. I think this is going to be really neat to use, like bringing it outside, connecting with the trees around me by almost using this deck to kind of, to give voice to the actual trees around me. I feel like that's the energy this deck has. So to me, it feels very much like a guiding energy. That's how it functioned for me last month, but in my regular day-to-day, I see myself using this in a similar way that I use like fairy oracles, where I very much use it to connect with that energy right outside my house. I feel like I'm definitely going to use this deck to connect with the tree energy around me. Use this as a way to kind of give voice to that energy. It's really great. As you get, there's different colors. It's broken up into different suits. I think this deck is really well done. I think the artwork is beautiful. And I think it's going to pair really nicely with a lot of my kind of like garden, summertime decks. So, that being said, let's take a look. I said that, what was that word? I said like lates. Let's take a look at the things that I've been using it with. Alright, so since my pretty much exclusive use of this deck so far has been in the Fellowship of the Weavers, I thought I would show the tarot decks I used alongside it for last month's section of the Fellowship, and I do really like how they paired. So we're going to start with the Hobbit Tarot. Which, of course, I mean, is themed around the Hobbit. So it's got a magical forest theme. I like, too, how, I mean, in the story, we, if I'm remembering correctly, we get trees that come to life. So it felt like they fit together in that way. Do I think visually they're the best? Not necessarily, but I think the colors do go together. I don't think, you know, I think it goes, but I really enjoyed how these read together. I like just how the energy of them felt together, again, because I feel like, aside from this dinosaur, for the most part, the Sylvankind, I think, really fits into this world of the Hobbit. I will say that, of the two tarots, this is the one I used the least because I think I did really favor the other pairing. But I think this was a good one. So that being said, let's jump right into that other pairing, because I think that's really what stole the show for me, and I see myself really kind of pulling this next tarot out with this deck again, just for regular everyday use. And that is the Odyssean Tarot. So once I tried these together, I pretty much just exclusively used these two decks for last month's Fellowship. Like, oh, look at that. The colors just, they go so well together. I think the art really works. I did feel like when I first got the Sylvankind, I was a little bit worried about this style of art. I don't know what you would call it, like vector? I think it's vector style. Someone definitely correct me if I'm wrong. But regardless, this kind of art style is one that I don't really tend to gravitate towards. And so I kind of knew I wasn't going to have something else similar to this art style to pair it with. But I think that something about MJ Cullinane's art in Odyssean just, it works. And you see like the colors showing up in the cards, which I love when that happens. They just paired so well, because it was kind of this thing of like, the Sylvankind was this like bigger energy of the trees that make up this forest, while the tarot brought in the energy of the creatures living within those trees, within and around those trees, so it just felt like it really made sense in that way too. Where it's like the Sylvankind in concept of trees would be kind of that overarching energy, and it really worked that way in my readings too. So I really, I had such a good time with this deck. I can't wait to pull them out again, like to bring them outside and do readings in the summer. I just feel like that's going to be so good. So that is my other pairing for the Sylvankind. But, you know, I think that's what I got for this one. So let's move on to the next deck. Okay, next deck we're going to look at is the Odyssean Tarot. Now, this was a Kickstarter. I did not back this on Kickstarter, so I want to say those who did received this in November, maybe early December, but I purchased this after the Kickstarter was complete, so I got this in like December, maybe very early January, but I want to say it was December. Now, this is a deck all based around Greek myth. It's so beautiful. And I feel like this was a real, like, everyone was raving about it when they got their Kickstarters in. Of course, like, I mean, clearly I was convinced into making the purchase, but for very good reason. The guidebook is really kind of what stands out about this one. Oh, I do not have it on hand, naturally. But this deck does such an amazing job of really telling the story around different Greek myths. So each of the cards kind of involves a different figure from Greek mythology, different stories. And so for each of the cards in the guidebook, look at that, you get a really full-fledged version of the story behind what's going on in this card. You get a Delphic maxim, and then you do get an interpretation of the tarot card. And I just think the creator did such an amazing job pairing the stories and the tarot cards, which is really neat, and especially because, you know, you think tarot is just a look at the human experience, and mythology is kind of meant to do the same thing, so it makes sense that they can connect really seamlessly, and I think this deck does it so well. And so if you are someone who's interested in Greek myth and are looking for a deck that just like really gets into it, this is the one. This is the one. I've not tried tons and tons of Greek mythology decks, but of the ones I have personally tried and seen, I mean, my not so hot take, I guess, since I've been using this for quite a few weeks now, is that I just feel like this one just does it the best. And, oh, especially pairing this with the Hellenic Oracle from Thea. Oh my gosh, so good. So, how it functions for me though, let's get into that. Now, you can use it just like a regular tarot, but because there's so much to get into with the guidebook, and I'm not personally a huge expert on Greek mythology, this is a single card draw for me. And so, but in an interesting way, where usually when tarot feels like a single card draw, it almost functions like an oracle, but that's not the case with this one. So it feels like a very special, I don't know, very special case kind of deck in a way, where I still like want to pair it with oracle. It doesn't feel like an oracle type message, it still feels like a tarot message. But pulling more than one, honestly, is just too much reading for me. So I like pulling one. And so oftentimes this kind of is like a single card draw that I will use both an oracle with, but then sometimes also another tarot deck. in a way, it's almost like a secondary oracle deck, but I do still see it as a tarot. I realize I'm not making much sense at all. But that's really how it's kind of functioned for me. And it's really a thing of like, when I am sitting down, I've got some time to just get into the story, and that's the kind of mood I'm in, where I want to read a story and sort of like reflect and see myself and whatever is going on in that story. This is just like the perfect deck for doing something like that. So it's a jam-packed deck. A lot going on here, a lot to examine, which is why, so pretty. Which is why it's a single card draw for me. But that's sort of how I tend to utilize it, where I do really like using it as a card for the day, a card for the week. I think it works really, really well like that because there's that story that you can kind of keep going back to, whether it's throughout your day or throughout the week. That's been my favorite way to use it. But like I said, I do kind of like pairing it still with another oracle, or I won't really pair it with another tarot unless there's another oracle. So that's kind of the main thing. So we're going to examine the oracles that I've enjoyed pairing with this. All right, I've got another 2 decks, 2 oracles to show with this deck. Now this was actually one of my decks for the month of February, so that's kind of where the use came in as like a daily, sometimes weekly card. And of course the first I have to show with this, I've already mentioned, is the Hellenic Oracle. I mean, how can you not? Just 2 powerhouse Greek myth decks. I feel like this is, if you're wanting Greek, specifically like Greek mythology decks, this is where it's at. And pairing them together, I really liked. And I was curious to see if I would like that, because obviously within this reading we're getting a lot of times 2 different stories, 2 different characters. But since, of course, like a lot of Greek mythology and the characters are all like interwoven and interdispersed, I guess you could say, I found that wasn't confusing or distracting. And it was an interesting thing of seeing how different characters related to each other. And it was cool at times when you would get, or when I would pull cards from these with characters where their stories already did line up, or they were involved in each other's stories. It was really cool when that did happen. But even if it didn't, it was easy to make a connection of like where their stories could line up. And so it felt like very much existing in the same world. I also just think aesthetically so beautiful. These look so nice together, and there's just so much to get into. And I like the juxtaposition a bit of this deck having that big guidebook that gives you everything, where with Thea's Oracle, it's very much like you go out and you kind of find the story yourself, you study it yourself, so it felt like a really good balance in that way. So that's the Hellenic Oracle. And then I did want to spend time pairing it with something that wasn't like, you know, mythology or deity based, to kind of let this be the star of that show. And so what I ended up really liking with it was the Queen Mab Oracle. Which is like kind of a, it is, I feel like, meant to be a fairy deck. I don't see it that way. To me, it's like a dark divine feminine. So it does bring in still that kind of divine energy, but to me in a very non-specific way. So I just really, really like how these decks paired up, because again, on this side, it's kind of examining this dark feminine, and of course within Greek mythology, we get a lot of dark themes, a lot of darker things happening. I think in that way, they ended up really just kind of pulling on each other's messages really well. Where it felt like, oh, look at that. It felt like usually I would read into this card first, read the story, get all that info, and then I would look at this card. And it was like, it always felt like this card here gave me a bit of guidance in terms of like, all right, you read this whole story, but here's what we're focusing on. Here's what you're taking out of it for today. Which was so, it was so nice. It's like this deck was able to kind of zero in on the specific theme that would be helpful for that moment, for that day or week, however I used it. And I think they look really nice together. I really enjoyed using these two together, and I'm excited. Look at that. It's definitely a pairing to me that I'm like, I'm gonna think of one and the other when I pull them out. And so I definitely see myself bringing this back out again in the summer at some point. I really, really enjoyed these two together. So that is the Queen Mab Oracle with the Odyssean. And that's what I got for that. So let's move on to the next. Okay, next. Oh my gosh, this is one that I've been loving so much. It is the Unfinished Business, a Ghostly Tarot by MJ Colonnade. This is her latest deck to be released. She does have the Liminal Forest Oracle that I pre-ordered. So excited. So that's technically it, but it's not here yet. So like, anyway, this tarot. I feel like I've already somehow talked about it so many times, even though I got this in January. So I haven't had this super long, but I feel like I've already talked about it so many times somehow. And I think it's because, and I wanted to include it here, even though I usually, like, these last two decks are ones that, like, usually I would like to spend longer with it before I put them in one of these videos, but they've made such an impact that it felt like I could. So here we are. And that's definitely the case with this deck, where it was such like a wow. I'm not explaining like what the deck is. It is clearly a ghost-themed tarot. I do have a walkthrough of this one up. So very much dealing with themes around death, grief, but also just... It's interesting because, yes, it deals with those themes, but I don't even know that it does so super directly. To me, it feels more like this energy of almost like a Memento Mori energy. And I don't mean like in terms of like the deck, Memento Mori, like the concept of, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the direct kind of translation of that. But like that idea of, you know, eventually we all die. So kind of what are you making of your story now? And so what this deck does is takes, each of the card has a character or like a set of characters, and you get the story of some aspect of their lives as it connects to like these like pivotal moments almost in these characters' lives that maybe led to their death or just was this, again, like a pivotal moment for them that, I mean, oftentimes, because again, it's ghosts, so it does lead to their death. But it uses those stories of these pivotal moments to kind of highlight the theme as it relates to the tarot card. And it's like every card I've pulled from this deck, I, to this day, remember the story, which is odd for me because my short-term memory is horrendous. But I remember these stories. They stick with me. I think about them a lot. Even it's like the first one I pulled, it's been a few weeks and I'm still thinking about it. And situations will come up that remind me of that story and I'm like, oh. here's what either I should or shouldn't do. Like, here's how it went for that character, and maybe I should make a different choice. It's almost like, okay, it's coming together in my brain of, you get these stories of surrounding the characters in these decks deaths. And sometimes it's positive things that they do, and sometimes it's not. And it's almost this thing of allowing the reader to take those stories and sort of reflect on, okay, should different decisions have been made or not? So it's like, when I pull a card and the story sticks in my head, when I'm in a similar scenario, it's like, I'm thinking back on, how did this go for that character? Do I want to make the same choice, or is that something I really want to be wary of doing? So good. So this is actually another one. Single card draw, but I do find it can work really well as an oracle because, again, it's like, it really does relate it back to the card, the tarot card, so well. But to me, there is a section in the guidebook that speaks to the tarot card, but I find I actually, or tarot interpretation outside of the story, but I find that I don't go to that. I read the story and I let that be what it is, because the stories are so well written, so impactful, that it just feels like that's what I'm needing from this deck. And so in a way, it feels a bit like I use it as an oracle. And I've really been so thoroughly enjoying this so much. And I find myself often, it's not usual for me, but I haven't paired this with a ton because I find myself just enjoying a single card draw from it, because again, you get so much from the stories. At least, you know, the ones I've pulled so far. I've pulled quite a few, and I've yet to be disappointed by the story. I think it's fantastic. It feels like it does something really different, and I love it. I really, really love this deck. I just think, again, I think it's really doing something different than what we have seen. I do think it could be comparable to the Ghosts and Spirits by Lisa Hunt. I think if you're looking for a mass market deck, I do think that one does something similar. And I have both, and I love the Ghosts and Spirits, but I have to say, something about the way these are written, personally, it just sticks with me better. The story really sticks with me compared to the Ghosts and Spirits, but yeah, I really love this. I think it's so great. And while I haven't paired this with a lot, I still think there's some value. Like, let's look at it. Let's look at what I have paired it with, because, I don't know, it's fun. Why not? All right, unfinished business. Now, when I have been using other decks with this deck, as you can see, I've got it in the center. A lot of times it acts very oracle-like, as I mentioned. So, the tarot that I kind of seek out when I do pair it, I kind of want it to be, a bit simpler, not necessarily kind of as involved, a bit more straightforward. So I found myself really, really leaning into pip decks to pair with this. So, for starters, the Antique Anatomy, of course. I feel like anything around death and ghosts, I think of Claire Goodchild decks, and I think this goes really nicely. And again, it's not to say that there isn't, like, substance to this tarot, but it's a bit more straightforward than, like, the story that goes on with the unfinished business. But I really have enjoyed this pairing a lot. It feels like a good kind of using the tarot to get clarity on how the story pertains to something, or getting guidance on, like, how it might show up, like, things of that sort. And I just think, oh, look at that, like, aesthetically, they're so good too, right? And interestingly, because you know, ghosts, of course, we're going to think like fall time. But I think with the coloring of the unfinished business, or the coloring that shows up a bit, and like all the botanicals in Antique Anatomy, I think this would be really fun to use in the summer. I think it can be used all year round, I think really is what I'm trying to say. Just like, that's how I feel about Antique Anatomy. I think this pairing is one that is just fun for all year, which I'm excited about, because usually this kind of ghost theme, like the Ghost and Spirits tarot, I pretty much exclusively bring out in the fall time, but that is not the only time death and decay is happening. Is that when it's most prevalent? Yeah, but you know, there's value to examining that otherwise. So really, really enjoy these two together. That is the Antique Anatomy. And second one I have here, I'm just going to give content warning. I think we're all familiar with this content warning at this point because I got the Cursed Auguries, so just scary stuff in it. If you don't like that, just, you know, it's a little gory. As we're on this card. I guess too little too late. But I really like how these go together too. I think this, to me, this pairing feels a bit more like, what's the word? Modern is not really what I'm looking for, but I feel like the unfinished business, where the Antique Anatomy, of course, is completely, it's themed around like Victorian era drawings, medical papers, things. I don't know. You know, it's got a Victorian aesthetic. But the unfinished business does not necessarily always take on that vintage theme, that vintage look. And so what I really like about the Cursed Auguries is that it feels like it still kind of scratches my personal itch when it comes to, I just love things looking vintage and kind of witchy and magical. But I do think, in comparison, it brings it to a bit more of like a modern-ish place. You know what I mean? Woo! I just think it strikes that balance really well, and so that's what I really like this pairing for, is when, I don't know, it's just not, the mood doesn't seem to be that kind of bringing it to a vintage days of yore, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, the right here, right now. That's what this pairing feels like to me in comparison, for whatever reason. But I love them together. I think they're so good. So, those are the two decks I have been loving with the unfinished business when I do pair decks with it. But again, I do also really like this as just like a single card draw. So, that's what I got. Let's move on to the last deck. Okay, last but not least, we're gonna look at the I'm Here Oracle. Now, this is really new for me. It only came in a few weeks ago. But again, it's just, it has felt really kind of impactful and exciting. Ooh, gotta plug in my camera. Exciting to the point where I really have been using it a lot since I got it. Okay. Is that gonna be my Easter egg in every video of plug in the camera? Anyway. I've just been loving this so much. I've used it a ton already. And it's just one of those where sometimes I feel like with decks, I really need to put it through its paces, really like spend a bit of time having it in my space and figuring it out before I can sort of feel like I have something to say in this regard, of more of like a review of use. But then there's some like this where it falls right into place almost immediately, of like, okay, yeah, here's how it works for me. At least right now, you know, I think decks can sort of shift and change their use, but this is one that, like, immediately from the first use, it fell into this, like, really good tool in a specific way, and so it just already feels like I can sort of speak to more of like a review of use, because I have been using it a certain way since I got it, and it's just been so impactful, and I love it so much. So I guess I should say, what is that use? So this, to me, it is like, it's not an affirmation deck. It is like a, like a healing kind of oracle. What would like the word be for that? It says on the back to explore ideas for gentle ways to heal and connect with yourself. So like, it's not an affirmation deck, but like, you know, that kind of vibe, you know, where it can kind of fit in there. But a bit similarly to the Wisdom of the Wild Things, I find that where this deck really sits for me is getting an actionable step. So I really love pairing this with other oracles that either are kind of like shadow work oracles, where they bring up sort of something lying underneath the surface that should be examined, maybe worked on, or other decks that kind of bring up themes around healing that also more do a job of pointing out, okay, here's what's going on. I love pairing this with decks like those, and I'll pull this card, one of these cards, second as, okay, I've got the information now. I see what's going on, but what do I do? What do I do about it? And I think that's a lot of times where I can get caught up in readings, especially ones that are examining like shadow or like just things hidden beneath the surface or things I need to work on, is I get really caught up or confused about that. Well, how do I do that? Like, I've pulled this card, I see the message, but now what? And this deck gives me so perfectly the now what. Things like reflect, wonder, look outside, cocoon, play. Like, while I was flipping through this deck for the first time, it's just, my brain made the connection of like, ooh, these are all actions. Like, these are things I can do. It's giving me a solid thing to do. And so that's really where this one has come in for me. I think it does a fantastic job. I love it so much. And I've really enjoyed pairing it with quite a few other oracles. I think that's what we're going to look at today, because that's sort of where the use has come in. But usually I will pull it with another oracle, and then so I'll do like a tarot reading as well. But the tarot deck I've been using with this is one I showed in my last deck speed dating, and it's the Boo Tarot, and that's just been, it's been the tarot deck for this one because they just pair so perfectly. So if you're interested in seeing that tarot pairing, it is in my last deck speed dating video. So, but for today we're going to look at the oracles I've been pairing with this to do that sort of reading. So let's take a look. Alright, so the I'm Here Oracle, again, we are looking at this in context of the oracles that I've really been liking pairing with this, and it just kind of worked out this time that all of the decks just had two. That's interesting. It wasn't on purpose, that's just seems to be how it's going. Which maybe that's just to get a good grasp on a deck. Maybe that's just the perfect number to try for me. I don't know. Anyway, first up that I've really been enjoying is the Into the Lonely Woods Oracle. This is just an oracle I love in general. I use it a lot. It is themed around like kind of grief, loneliness, and it's just been a really helpful one as I have been on an unmasking journey. It just feels like the Lonely Woods hits on a lot of themes, but I will say that a lot of times it's like I'd pull a card from here, and I always knew exactly what the message was getting at. But like I was saying in my review of this deck, is like felt like I was lacking the, all right, like what do I do? What do I do with this now? And these two together, it just really are so good, because it just gives me the, all right, here's what to do with this feeling. Because this deck really feels like it hits at an internal experience, like really getting to feelings about things. And I often don't really know what to do with or about certain feelings I'm having. Like when people say like, you gotta work through your feelings, feel your feelings, I don't really know what that means. Like, I don't know how to do that. And I don't mean that in this like, way of like, there's just too many feelings, like I just can't do it. Like, I don't mean it in that like melodramatic way. I mean like physiologically, I feel like my brain doesn't compute what that means. Like literally, I don't know what it means to do that. And so it's very helpful for me to have a deck like this that says, okay, do this, try this. I really love it for that. And so I really enjoy these two together. So that is the Into the Lonely Woods. Now, probably my favorite, my absolute favorite I've found so far, and this is a bit more like kind of general use feeling, or like, if there isn't necessarily, because the Into the Lonely Woods is like one I pull out for a very specific feeling, where this one is kind of a deck I can use as like, maybe I just want like a daily message, again like weekly, or I don't really know what I'm feeling, I need kind of help with that. The Creative Consciousness Healing. These decks are magic together. Just, I have to say that, just magical. First of all, I just think the artwork goes really well. So we have here Moon Pebbles, challenging yourself with compassion, and then like flow, lose yourself in a moment, an experience, or an activity. It's like this gives, here's what we're focusing on, here's the theme to examine within ourselves, here's what you can do to kind of get started. Emergency energetic boundary with zoom out. The big picture can reveal a lot of answers. Try taking a step back. So it's like, okay, we are in need of some emergency boundaries right now. Let's take a pause, zoom out to see where those are needed. Like, oh, it's so good. Transforming addictive thinking. Okay, so like that's the topic we're focusing on. What's the first step here? Ask for what you need. Ask for help. Opening self to worthiness. Okay, how do we start that process? Feel your emotions even if you feel like you understand them. Accepting all parts of you, with the action being stretch. Oh my god, like I could do this all day looking at these. It's just so good. I've been getting so much out of this pairing, and I will say this is the pairing that made me feel like I could already speak to this deck in this way, even though I've probably only had it like 2 weeks, realistically. But it just, I've been pulling cards from these two like every day, because it's doing so much. So if you have these two and haven't tried them together, I cannot recommend more. Magical experience. So that is my second pairing with the I'm Here, and that is the Creative Consciousness Healing Oracle. And that, my friends, is what I got for you today. So I'd love to know if you have any of these decks and have been working with them, what you think, how you use them, or if you don't have them, how you would imagine yourself using them. I'd love to know. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again very soon.